Hello everyone and welcome back to more Magic the Gathering lore. Let's continue the 13 Nights of Magic with a fairly recent baddie who got his debut back in Magic Origins, but actually hasn't had a dedicated card printed yet. He's a terror who passionately follows his own whims, even within the highly bureaucratic office of the consulate on Kaladesh. He murders without remorse and hates with a fire akin to that of a pyromancer. This is the story of Lieutenant Baral, Chief of Compliance. Relatively little is known about this man's past, only that he's spent a majority of his life within the influence of the consulate, the ruling political organization on Kaladesh. Physically, he's described as a very large man who towers over most. Other than his size, he's described as being terribly handsome, with a grinning smile that comes off as condescending. He carries himself with pride, while also looking down on those he sees as lesser, which, as it turns out, is almost everyone else. Even though he serves the strict ranks of the consulate, Baral is very passionate and principled, willing to disobey orders to meet his own desires. Make no mistake, this isn't a man who bends the rules to better serve the people of Kaladesh. Rather, he skirts the few good laws in place in order to fulfill his own idea of justice. As a captain in the consulate, Baral was given special enforcement tasks by the leading party at the time, a party that despised mages, especially the fire magic of pyromancers. He excelled at this position, enforcement being the more fun property of his duties. While he tracked and hunted various pyromancers, he secretly kept his own magical prowess under wraps. He specialized in anti-fire magic, a skill which came in handy in his line of work. Yet still, mages of all types were seen as undesirables, and certainly unbecoming of an officer of the consulate, so he hid his abilities. Mission after mission, he brought quote-unquote justice to would-be firestarters all across Kaladesh. Eventually, a report came of a young girl with emerging pyrotechnic abilities. Without hesitation, Baral jumped on this opportunity. He discovered that this girl, this Chandra, was the daughter of Pia and Chandra Nalaar, two criminals in the eyes of the consulate. They were major players in the underground Aether smuggling ring, stealing the precious resource from large factories and giving it to struggling inventors and the poor. They thought they were doing Kaladesh a service, but in the eyes of Baral and the consulate, they were nothing more than rebel rats. Drooling at the thought of capturing all three in a single assault, Baral started his hunt for the Nalaars. As he gave chase, the family ran in horror. While the brash Chandra tried to get a hold of her powers, her protective parents did everything they could to hide their tracks. A difficult task knowing they were being followed by a premier anti-pyromancer officer. Town after town, Baral turned over homes, families, entire lives in his eager search for the Nalaars. It seemed nothing would stop him, and he was willing to kill if it meant getting his hands around the young pyromancer. Yet, every time Baral found a new lead, he'd find himself one step behind the Nalaars. They had avoided his justice at every turn. Eventually, the cost of this campaign started to bleed any perceived profit, especially as the former leading party was replaced and their priorities no longer focused on the persecution of pyromancers specifically. Baral and his company were called back. They were to end their hunt. Passionate and headstrong as ever, Baral refused to recall his forces until his mission was complete. This wasn't some sick sense of honor, but rather, he felt his pride had been damaged. This little girl had evaded him despite his best efforts. No one, not even the consulate, would keep him from rectifying this. He disobeyed orders and finally found himself in a position to smoke out the Nalaar rats. He had found the village the Nalaars had been staying in for safety. He quietly surrounded it with his men and advanced forward. The people of the small village protested this show of force, but as Baral showed real force, they backed off. Finally, out of the forest approached a little girl, Chandra Nalaar. She offered herself to the officer, wanting no one else to be harmed. Oh, she'd be captured alright, because she's a threat, a destructive force, a murderer. Of course, these claims were untrue, but Baral needed to make Chandra look like a grave threat to explain his dissident actions. He ordered his men to set the village ablaze. Those who died here died as a direct result of this pyromancer Chandra Nalaar. Her mother was one of those who supposedly was lost to the blaze. Her father, stabbed in the gut by Baral himself. Chandra was captured and brought back to the city to meet a public execution. Baral was quite pleased with himself. As the young girl stood under the blade of the executioner, she remained still in grief, until the man leaned down to whisper to her. It was Baral. The man who had killed her family and took everything from her was now wearing a mask and preparing to kill her as well. As the blade fell, the situation and pending death was enough to trigger her latent planeswalker spark, engulfing the surrounding area in intense fire and heat as she planeswalked away from Kaladesh to safety. Baral's detest and hatred for pyromancers, and this girl in particular, resulted in his ultimate downfall. He was publicly humiliated that day, along with being horribly burnt and disfigured. For his crimes against the consulate and the public outcry, Baral was demoted from captain to lieutenant, losing a lot of his own esteem and pride. Now, with the return of Chandra to Kaladesh, there's a lot of unfinished business between these two passionate figures. Baral, for instance, has been busy since the day she left her homeworld, including the psychological torture of her mother, Chandra Nalaar, who somehow managed to survive the attack which captured her daughter. Chandra would meet her would-be assailant again as she stumbled into his deadlock trap with another planeswalker, Nissa Ravane. Baral planned on leaving his prisoners to suffocate, but was ultimately denied his revenge when they were rescued by the Leonin planeswalker, Ajani Goldmane. Now, Baral works closely with Tezzeret, the head judge, as he confiscates the grand inventions at the Inventors Fair and arrests those unwilling to obey their law. His story is yet to be completed, but for a man who's caused so much pain on a world so strict, I'm sure his fate will fit the way he lived. Monsters don't always have sharp teeth and ravenous appetites. Hate pierces further than any fang, and evil can act as a hunger only satiated by actions. And that's it for this episode of the 13 Nights of Magic, and now you can enter for your chance to win a copy of Insidious Will. All you have to do is be a subscriber to the channel, leave a comment on this video, and share it with your friends. If you enjoyed the video, please do everything just mentioned. It goes a long way in supporting my content. You can also check out my Patreon page and follow me on Twitter and Facebook, so you can stay up to date on all my latest videos. You can find links to all those and to the story which inspired this video linked in the description below. As always guys, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.